Greetings, Culture Warriors. It is I, Jeff Vieira, author of Culture is Everything, and your host for this latest Dispatch from the Front. Shifting to the world of education today, we have a story for you from Bloomberg by Andrea Gabor, more of an opinion piece. U.S. schools must reopen. Are you listening, New York? Online schooling has failed. American schools need to reopen in the fall. It has now become obvious that the steady diet of online instruction put in place for the coronavirus pandemic not only has hurt kids academically and increased absenteeism, but has contributed to anxiety and depression and probably even aggravated health problems such as obesity. All policy considerations for the coming school year should start with the goal of having students physically present in school, the American Academy of Pediatrics said in a June report. A few states are starting to tackle the challenge of balancing the proven damage inflicted by inadequate internet technology and the deeper shortcomings of digital learning against the uncertain risks of COVID-19 infection. California, New Jersey, Alabama, and Louisiana are among several states that have published detailed guidelines for enabling at least some in-person instruction. Other states, notably New York, have lagged behind, or like Florida, are ignoring the realities of the health crisis. Although New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio announced a back-to-school plan before the 4th of July weekend, it was short on details and clouded by political feuding. Governor Andrew Cuomo, in a long-running game of one-upmanship, disputed the mayor's authority to act, but didn't offer his own plan. It's past time to put aside politics. States that are not yet prepared should borrow from other states. California and New Jersey's detailed blueprints, for example, recognize that each district must develop its own plan based on local needs and healthcare realities. They avoid mandates, instead providing suggestions for everything from staggered class schedule options to enable social distancing, to strategies for loading school buses safely, back to front pickup, and first in, last in drop-off for California's recommendations, to the equipment and hygiene protocols to deter viral infections. By contrast, Florida, in the midst of a COVID-19 spike, is among the few states mandating that all schools reopen daily for in-person instruction, a directive that is almost certainly impossible to follow safely. Well, that's absolute nonsense. For one thing, children tend to fare very well with the coronavirus, having very mild symptoms. You won't find child deaths outside of pretty extensive comorbidities associated with having the virus. So the nonsense that kids should not allowed to go back to school for fear that they will be little petri dishes with regard to the virus and somehow suffer disproportionately from it is just ridiculous. How to do this, quote, safely is also ridiculous, because the fact of the matter is that safety is always a comparative situation. Is it safe for children to be cooped up in their homes, afraid to venture outside? No, it's manifestly not safe. There's a cost to everything, and the cost of this lockdown is particularly high. For example, for those of us who have lost our jobs due to this outbreak, how does that help the children? Doesn't help my children, I can tell you that much. Having that sense of normalcy that the school day brings is important. It's important for the psychological health of the children. Being told to treat other children as lepers because your parents are afraid of catching cold is not healthy. You can read the rest of the article. It's kind of the typical hand-wringing nonsense by a control freak. But let's talk instead about the conflict of values this brings up. The pandemic has exposed, on the one hand, a generational conflict. The virus is brutal on people over the age of 70. That said, you have to put it in perspective. The virus as a cause of death, the average age at the time of death from the Wuhan virus, even with this ridiculous habit of taking people who were gunshot victims and because they tested positive for antibodies of the virus, claiming that they are COVID-19 victims. That happened in Washington State. But even when you factor that in, and you recognize that the age at the time of death from COVID is actually higher than the life expectancy in the country, even after you factor all that in, you realize that, okay, we've got an at-risk population, call it the 70s and overs, and then you got the rest of the country. So you have to look at the reality of, do you value protecting the 70s and overs to the extent that you do not allow the rest of the country to function? And in reality, what that choice comes down to is, will you starve children to death to save their grandparents and great-grandparents? That's what you're trading off. Now, for the vast majority of human history, the answer to that has been, of course not. There are traditions in different countries where human populations were put under enormous resource stress. The tradition was that when the population gets to a certain point, the oldest person in the population would leave it, generally going to their deaths, so that the younger population could live. If you ask the 70s and overs, you'll find no small portion of them who philosophically reflect on this and say, given such a choice, let those who have not lived full lives live them. However, you have to recognize that these tin pot dictators that I keep referring to belong overwhelmingly to the 70 and over cohort. In the Catholic Church, one of the lesser known features of the clergy today is not just the advanced age. You can see that walking in any church. You'll see, chances are you will see a priest who is elderly. Certainly a pastor who is. Very much so the bishop. Even more so the cardinals. They're elderly men. They're all over 70. What is lesser known is that a large number of them are immunocompromised. What do we mean by immunocompromised? We mean that one of the things that isn't well known outside, even, well, heck, it's probably not well known even inside of Catholic circles if you get right down to it, is the number of priests and bishops and cardinals who are HIV positive. And one explanation for why the Catholic Church in particular was perfectly fine with the shutdown of the public mass, something that is absolutely unprecedented in the 2,000-year history of the Church. The Catholic Church is one of the few churches where Sunday mass attendance is required on pain of going to hell. Should you miss Mass for anything other than, say, illness or absolute inability to get to a Mass, you must go to confession because it is a mortal sin in Catholic theology. By mortal sin, they mean it's the kind of behavior which, were you to die immediately after doing it, you would likely be damned. And yet, these Catholic clergymen suspended the obligation to attend Mass for the first time in American history, and did so without much complaint. And I would argue the reason that they did so was because we knew at that point that this virus targeted the elderly and those with compromised immune systems. It was particularly deadly for them. And when you think about the job of a priest in particular, administering sacraments, you are exposed to a lot of people. Demographically, a big portion of your daily Mass goers, and in the Catholic Church we have Mass every day. It's not obligatory every day, it's obligatory on Sunday, but we still offer Mass every day in most parishes. But your daily Mass goers tend to be your 70s and overs. So if you want to know why so many cardinals and bishops and priests absolutely freaked out over this virus, such that they were willing to deny sacraments to their people, such that when hospitals suggested that they not visit dying patients to administer the anointing of the sick, stream unction, the viaticum, which is a sacrament in our church, that's the reason why. They were scared for their own skins. And they valued their own skins more than they did the souls of their flock. Quite simple. So there's a generational aspect to this. Children, as we said, are pretty much unaffected by it. Normal cold for them. But yet we denied those children not just their education. We denied them their ceremonies. One of my nephews graduated from high school during this period, and like so many others, he was denied his prom. He was denied his graduation ceremony. They did the usual drive-by parade nonsense. He was denied the company of his friends. I well remember my senior year in high school. Senior year was a tremendous experience. It was wonderful. Senior year comes at the end of your primary school education here in the United States. Typically, if you're going to college, you'll have done all your work necessary to get into that college by your junior year. By the time you're early in your senior year, you'll know where you're going. You'll have gotten in to whatever college you're going to go to. You will have accepted it. And so once you've done that, the pressure is really off. And you can focus on enjoying the rest of your academics. Usually those academics are comparatively light. And they tend to be things that you have an interest in. So that makes it more pleasant. But you get to enjoy your friends, whether it be on athletic teams and clubs, etc., or just hanging out, because this is really the last time you'll spend with that group of people if you're going off somewhere else. It's a wonderful time. But a lot of these kids were denied a good portion of that time because the teachers freaked out. The teachers, for the most part, had a wonderful time. It was an extended vacation, paid. The workload dropped considerably. Sure, the more diligent among them put a lot of effort into their online materials, etc., but it didn't compare to what they had to do for their normal duties. It was the kids who got shortchanged. It was some of the best memories they would have in their lives, which they were denied. And that's a cost of this as well. What do you value? I think the living must value living. We're not machines. We're not automata. It doesn't really nurture us, nurture our souls, our spirits, to just sit locked in all day staring at the walls, waiting for the plague to pass. Which is why, in human history, you see that our response to such plagues has been to quarantine the sick, to protect those most vulnerable, and for the rest of us to go about our business and live our lives and bear up under the burdens that come to us. There's no such thing as safety. Any one of us could be dead tomorrow. No doubt many of us will be dead tomorrow. In the long run, we are all going to be dead. Death comes for us all. So it's not a question of being safe. You can't stave off the Reaper forever. What it is a matter of how you live your life. Catholics are given comfort by the fact that in our theology, this world is simply a proving ground for the next. The advantage of extending one's life is to give you another chance to earn your place in the next one. Through sanctity, through holiness, by repenting of your sins and choosing a different path. That gives us comfort. And so the reason why we bridle at things like euthanasia, at things like abortion, the reason why we bridle at those, quote, policies, is that it doesn't reflect the fact that the soul's purpose is to get to that final judgment. And you want to give that soul every opportunity of being judged worthy in the end. So it's a great crime, say, to murder someone, because perhaps they haven't had that chance. Now, we believe God's merciful and certainly just, so we don't lose too much sleep worrying about the state of those souls who've suffered that premature end of their lives. We leave it to God's mercy and trust that they'll get where they're going. But for the rest of us, even if you're an atheist, even if you believe that there is nothing more than this world and what we do in it, well, then you should be very outraged by the time that has been stolen from us. The time to work at jobs that we enjoyed. The time with our families. So many people have not been able to visit their relatives. The time with our dying loved ones that we have been denied. The time to make the memories that we'll treasure for a lifetime. Stolen from us by a bunch of control freak narcissists. Should be angry by that. Those are the values that I think are ultimately at play. Do you value life, actually living, more than you value breathing? What is it to have life but not to be able to live? How horrible a fate it is to be walled up within your own home. Nothing but a remote control pointed at a Netflix screen to keep you company. That, to me, and so many millions of others, is simply not living. And I think you're going to find, as the tyrants who presume to rule us try to extend this wonderful period where their word is absolute law, where they answer to no one, where their arbitrary decisions are treated as holy writ. That time is coming to an end, whether they like it or not, because the rest of us have had enough. Because at the end of the day, extending your life is important, but living is everything. Thank you and have a great day.